Hello, everybody, and thank you for letting me share what I've learned about building a comprehensive bariatric program and the stakeholders involved. I have nothing to disclose, and what I'd like to cover today is, how to create some of your goals, who needs to be at the table, and some of the basics of building a business plan. To give you a little background, we've been doing bariatrics at UNMC since '92, but for about the first eight years, all of the patients were being done in the general surgery clinic. We had brought a consultant firm in 2007 to try to help expand the program and turn us into a comprehensive center, but the return on investment was really poor because of the nature of their consultant fees. By 2010, though, we really started to think about doing this as an internal process. And so the first step was establishing the goals. The actual goals document was about 3 pages long, but what it really came down to was I wanted a multidisciplinary, purpose-built clinic for my patients. I wanted patients to walk in and really be able to tell that this space was built for them, that all of the tables and chairs would accommodate them, that the gowns would fit, that their wheelchairs and scooters would fit through the door, and that there was no question that they were welcome in the space. I also wanted all the clinicians who were going to see them to be there for them, rather than them having to go all over the enterprise to see the dietitians or the psychologists. And I wanted a classroom space where they could get the classroom and education that they needed, rather than going to an auditorium that in our location happened to be across the entire campus. I also wanted to add a medical bariatric arm with a bariatrician in order to help those patients who either needed to lose weight preoperatively, assistance with weight gain postoperatively, or for those patients who would either never would have surgery or could not have surgery because of insurance purposes. In order to make my dream a reality, though, I couldn't do it by myself. I'm fortunate to work in a place that has an Office of Strategic Initiative and helped me with some of the resources I needed. But if you don't have an Office of Strategic Initiative, there's usually someone who works either with the Chief Operating Officer or the Chief Strategy Officer who can help you out. And you need to figure out first, what form does the request come in? Is it a PowerPoint? Is it a 10-page document? What are the supporting documents that need to come with it? And what's the timeline? Most organizations work on a fiscal year, and there is a process for which these applications need to be in, because if the money hasn't been allocated as part of the annual budget, you're not on until next year. So who needs to be at the table? Because a huge part of the resources are personnel, you need any of the managers of the personnel that you are going to hire or have reallocated be supporting. So in our case, I needed more surgeons. I needed the chair of surgery. I wanted a bariatrician that was either an internist or an endocrinologist, so I needed the chair of medicine. I wanted psychologists dedicated to bariatric patients and dietitians dedicated to my program, rather than patients just being assigned to whoever was up next. I also needed the support of the directors of ambulatory operations, surgical services, and inpatient services. You would think that all of them would be very supportive about more patients being brought to their area, and they were, as long as they were given the resources to take care of them. My OR director is not going to be supportive of a project of taking care of more bariatric patients if he doesn't also have the extra OR beds necessary to take care of patients with size, as an example. In order to write an actual business plan, though, you also need data. And the data typically comes from your either hospital business office, some sort of financial analytics department, because you need billing numbers. Now, if you already are doing some bariatrics, you want the historic numbers. If you're not doing bariatrics, you'd like comparable numbers. You want numbers related to your Nissens or your benign partial gastrectomies. You want your case mix index. So you want to understand how many Blue Cross patients you have versus Medicare patients at your organization. You also want marketing data. So your marketing department will be important. They're going to help you find out your demographics, how many of your patients break down by BMI in your service area. I also want to give you a little heads up on what the timeline tends to look like. This is not the 70s and 80s when communication between a surgeon and a CEO would suddenly get money just falling into our bank accounts and being allocated to us. I wrote my goals by the end of 2010, and I had all the financials I needed a few months later. But honestly, it was months before I made it to the strategic planning committee, and they sent me back to rework things. And so things were not approved for almost a year after I had my goals done. Then I thought, great, I am on my way. Now things are going to start working quickly. And that's not what happened either, because I wasn't the only program that was approved in November of 2011. I had to go to a whole nother set of committees to get prioritized to figure out whether my project was going to be the one done first, second, or third within the next fiscal year. But once I was prioritized, I got a project manager assigned, space allocated, and we finally signed an architecture firm. We began demolition of the old space by November, and we opened our doors in July. One important point to realize when you're putting your plan together is to understand when you can hire people and when you are expected to deliver on your increased patient load. Because if it all can only happen after you open your doors, that's a very different thing than what I had, which is I was allowed to hire my extra manpower before I had my physical space, but then I needed people to help find homes for the new people I was hiring and the clinic spaces for them to see them. Now, the business plan itself. When I first did this, I did not have an MBA. I have since gone on to get my MBA, and one of the things I figured out is many business plans all have the same basic structure. They all start with an executive summary that's usually 1 to 2 pages, and you really want this to be pretty polished and pretty perfect, because the vast majority of the C-suite and the board of directors will only read this. Your chief financial officer is going to rip your business plan apart and read every line of the Excel spreadsheet and question every part of it. But the vast majority of them won't. They will just read this. So it is going to have areas that are duplicative of the rest of it, but it needs to be very clear. Why are you doing this? How is it going to improve the organization? What do you need in a nutshell, in just a couple of sentences? And how is this going to make your organization better? You need to understand what they are asking. You need to understand the differences between a capital investment, the things you are going to do and buy with the money, versus operating expenses, the money you are going to need year after year to keep going, the expenses related to your program, the salaries and leases that you're going to have, versus the indirect expenses, which is your share of the organization to keep the lights on. Now, the project overview has a lot more detail to it. It's usually between 3 and 5 pages, and it's a detailed description of the project. Why do you need it? Which patients are you going to help? How does your market need this? Who is really the stakeholders? The Department of Surgery, the Department of Medicine, the operating room. Physicians, because we are the most expensive hire, are usually called out in this area. What are the performance measures? And it's not just increased operative numbers and cases, but increased ambulatory visits, dietitian visits, psychologist visits. And how does this fit with the larger strategic plan? If your enterprise strategic plan is to improve care to a certain demographic or area or population, then you need to try to align with that to the best of your ability. The market and competitive analysis is part of this that takes a great deal of work, because you need to understand your patient population, how many people are in a BMI between 30 and 40 in your area, or greater than 40 in your area. How many have insurance coverage that will likely cover bariatric surgery? What operations are probably covered on their plans? What is your current competition, and what do you think your competition is doing with their centers of excellence? Disruptive forces is not a bad word when you're talking about a business plan, but you need to understand what they are. What is the balloon going to do in your area? Is SADE going to take off? And are all the other programs going to be doing these things? And are you going to do them? Are you not going to do them? What are the growth potentials? Your primary service area is the area your hospital gets 70 to 80% of its patients. And for us, it's the area in orange. Your secondary service area is the area you get 90% of your patients, and it's the area in brown. And one of the big obstacles I kept having is this was all the data my financial people kept giving me. And I kept trying to explain to them that even though that may be the map they're used to using, I get bariatric patients from the red line here. And that's because even though there are bariatric centers in several cities around Omaha, because they're either low acuity centers or because of limitations related to centers of excellence or designations with insurance companies, I get referred from these other centers. And that needs to be taken into consideration in the business plan. The other parts of the financial analysis have to do with exactly how much money you need, how you're going to spend the money. Is the money on people? Is the money on renovations? Is the money on objects? And when do you need it? Most of it, well, I'm sorry, some of it you need before you even open your doors. Some of it you need for year one because they are hires that are essential, but some of it you need as part of your growth plan. Don't ask for it all immediately if you don't need for it all immediately. And then also, are there opportunities for partnership? If you're not going to use all of the space immediately, is there someone else that can use the space for the first 6 or 8 months? Payer mix is important when you're doing the financial analysis because we know that not everyone pays us the same for the same amount of work. So you want to understand how each insurance company pays you to do the work you're doing, but also how many lives do you have from Medicare versus Medicaid versus a commercial insurance. You also need to understand, and that is best achieved, that is best achieved if you can give them real numbers, real medical record numbers and dates of service for them to try to get that, as compared to giving them just CPT or DRG codes, because they tend to miss them. You also want to try to get them to allot you as much of the upstream and downstream revenue as possible. Upstream revenue is all the labs, x-rays, endoscopies that were done between your first visit and the actual operation. Downstream revenue is all of the labs, endoscopies, and other procedures done in the next 12 months. But none of those things would probably be done at your organization if they weren't coming to you for bariatric surgery. And so if you can capture that data and put it in your business plan, you will be a much more favorable proposal. You also need an FTE plan. As I mentioned, you usually don't need all of these people the day you open your doors. And so you want to be realistic about whether you need them in year 1 versus year 5. Implementation includes how this is going to happen. You don't need to hire the bariatrician's nurse until you have the bariatrician's start date, but also what success looks like. How many clinic patients are you going to see in a month versus a year? How many operations is that going to translate into? You need to understand your risks, but you also need to have an exit strategy. If this for some reason goes sideways, what else can the space be used for, and how can these people be reallocated? Thank you very much for letting me share what I've learned from having done this now several times, both to start a program and to expand a program. I'm sorry we couldn't do this live, and so I can't answer your questions, but please feel free to contact me if I can help you on your journey. Thank you.